Today we're looking at solving equations with fractions. Our very first equation is not going to be a linear equation because we're going to have x on the bottom. So let's take a look at our first equation here. We're going to have 4.2 divided by x is equal to 6. Alright? Now first thing when we look at this, we notice x is on the bottom. It's our denominator. Well, we know nothing can be divided by 0. So automatically we could say that x cannot equal to 0. We have a restriction of a number that x cannot be. Our variable cannot be. Now we also looked at stuff like this before. So remember way back in the day you said maybe 6 divided by something is equal to 3. Well, you knew that this something was 2 because that was 3 times that 3 times what is equal to 6, that is 2. So we're going to rearrange this kind of like how I did there. So I'm going to have here, we're going to say, this is the same thing as saying 6 multiplied by x is equal to 4.2. So 4.2 is equal to 6 multiplied by x. Another way of thinking of that is the way I like doing it, is here we have x on the bottom. So how do we get rid of x as a denominator? We're going to multiply both sides by x. Now, if we multiply both sides by x, these x's cancel off because x divided by x is 1. So we end up with 4.2 is equal to 6x. So those are a couple ways of doing this. Now, once we are set up like this, and we still know that x cannot equal to 0, we've seen stuff like this before. So now all we're going to do is divide both sides by 6, because we want x to be by itself. So I'm going to end up looking at this. We go 4.2. and we want to divide it by 6. 6 goes into 4 0 times. 6 goes into 42 7 times. So my answer is 0.7. So we get 0.7 is equal to x. Okay? Let's take a look at my next one here. My next one is a little bit more challenging. For my next one, we are going to have x over 3 minus 2 over 5 is equal to 1 over 6. Okay. So my first step, normally what I want to do is put everything we can into improper fractions. So if we have any mixed fractions, we're going to convert them to improper fractions. In this scenario here, everything is already a, improper fraction because there are no improper fractions. We don't know this might be. But overall, there isn't. Next thing I'm going to do is find my lowest common denominator. We could always do this by moving this over to this side and adding fractions, subtracting fractions. That's pretty hard. It's kind of difficult. So what we're going to do instead is we're going to try and get rid of all fractions. And by doing that, we're going to use our lowest common denominator of all of these. So if we look at the factors here, we have 3 as a factor, 5 is a prime factor, so 3 and 5 are prime factors, and the prime factors of 6 are 3 times 2. Now we have 1 shared here as 3. So my lowest common denominator is 3, because there's 2 of those, multiplied by 5, multiplied by 2, which is equal to 30. Okay? So, we're going to continue here. Now the reason why we want the lowest common denominator is, if I look at this here, if I multiply this by 30, that will get rid of the 3. 30 can be divided by 3. 30 can also be divided by 5, and 30 can be divided by 6, because 30 has all the factors that are in these denominators. I can multiply it by all denominators, multiply all the denominators again and multiply it in, but then I'm going to have a really large number. So we're trying to make the numbers as small as possible. So let's multiply everything here by 30, or I'm going to multiply it by this, 3 times 5 times 2, which is the same thing as 30. So I'm going to have 3 multiplied by 5, multiplied by 2, multiplied by x, all over 3, minus 3, my lowest common denominator, which is 3 multiplied by 5, multiplied by 2, there's my lowest common denominator, multiplied by 2 again, all over 5, is equal to 3 multiplied by 5, multiplied by 2, and then we could say a 1 all over 6. because this here is my lowest common denominator. And this is what happens. 6 is the same, well, let's start over here. So 3 divided by 3 is 1. So now I'm left with 5 times 2, which is equal to 10. So we have 10x. Now right here, 5 divided by 5 is 1. So now I'm left with 3 times 2 times 2. So 3 times 2 is 6, times 2 is 12. Now we're going to look here. We have 6 is the same as 3 times 2. So 3 times 2 is 6 divided by 6. So we're left with is equal to 5. Now we have no more denominators. So all we do now is we solve like we have done in previous lessons. So first of all here we have negative 12. That's 12 boys. So if we want to get rid of the 12 boys, we're going to have to add 12 girls. And what we do to one side must do to the other side. Because 12 boys and then 12 girls show up, there's going to be every boy has a partner and every girl has a partner, so we're just going to be left with 10x is equal to 17. Now what I'm going to do is divide by 10. Okay? So we want to know the value, if 10x is equal to 17, what's the value of each x? So in this case here, x is going to be equal to 17 over 10, or 1 and 7 tenths. Okay. I have one more for us here to do. This next one, we're going to have brackets on both sides with a coefficient in front. So let's take a look at this here. We're going to have 2 over 3 multiplied by x plus 2 over 3 is equal to 3 over 4, oopsie, 4 over 3, not 3 over 4, I want to put 4 over 3 multiplied by x over 4 plus 5 over 6. Okay. So now we're going to look at kind of what we did in the lesson before. I have 2/3 of this and 4/3 of that. Well, if I look at this on both sides of the equation, these are the common denominators. So it's kind of like saying I have 2 of these and 4 of these. Or in other words, if they have the common denominators, I'm going to get rid of this side here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to multiply it by the reciprocal. So 3 over 2, if we multiply, that's the same thing as dividing 2/3. And I'm going to multiply this side by 3 over 2. Okay? So this is what we're going to end up getting. These will cancel off, so I'm just left with x plus 2 over 3 is equal to, well, 3 divided by 3 is 1, and 4 divided by 2 is going to be 2. All right. So now this is set up in a different way. We don't have fractions as our coefficients in front of the brackets. So it makes it a little bit easier. So we're going to now have to multiply this in to each term. This term here stays the same because there's a 1 in front, so we just have one group of these. So I'm going to be left with x plus 2 over 3 on this side is equal to, well, 2 divided by 4 is a half. So we have 1/2 x. So that's x over 2, or 1x over 2. Now, 2 divided by 6 is a third, times, and then we have times 5 is 5/3. So here, this is going to be plus 5 over 3. Okay? So now we're going to try and solve this here. Now, I look at this, we're going to first try and get rid of all denominators. So once again, we have a situation here, we have denominators. So my lowest common denominator is equal to 6. All of these we can make equal to 6. So I'm going to multiply every single term now by 6. So we go 6 multiplied by x plus 6 multiplied by 2 over 3 is equal to 6 multiplied by x over 2 plus 6 multiplied by 5 over 3. Okay? Now we look at this here. 6 times x is 6x. 6 divided by 3 is 2. Times 2 is 4. 6 divided by 2 is 3, so it's 3x. And then 6 divided by 3 is 2, times 5 is 10. Now let's try and solve this a little bit more. Now it's based on what we've looked at before. There's no more fractions. This makes it a lot more easier. So I'm going to take away 3x here, take away 3x here. Keep it balanced. What we do to one side must always do to the other side. So I'm going to be left with 3x plus 4 is equal to 10. Now I'm going to take away 4 here, take away 4 there. So we are just basically isolating, putting all x's on one side and all my numbers on the other side. And remember, what we do to one side must always do to the other side. So I'm going to be left with 3x is equal to 6. Now if I have 3 of something is equal to 6, each of those is going to be equal to 2. We divide by 3, x is equal to 2. And that's how we do equations